I might go off script a little bit, just in like hearing even the questioning process. Like there's so many different things that I felt are kind of necessary to say. So if I feel like I need to, it's just probably gonna come out. But I'll try to keep it. Yeah, sorry.
I got
I'll
you.
try to
Yep.
keep it. All right. Yeah. In order to tell you a few of the most important things I've learned on this incredible journey, it's appropriate to start with why. Why TBB? What events in my life led me to get on a flight from Detroit to Baltimore, to do a trust fall into a sprinting whirlwind that felt more like jumping out of a plane than getting on one? Before I go into it all, I'd like to briefly explain my relationship with this presentation. For me, there isn't one thing, one moment, or one lesson I learned over the past 6 months. Every single day has challenged me in one way or another. Who knows, in a couple months or even a couple weeks, I might think of 5 different things I should have put in this presentation. But here it goes anyway. It starts, as you might imagine, in high school in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I fell victim to bad influences, avoidance of hard work, and use of substances. Eventually, my poor choices reached a boiling point. I was suspended from school. I tried everything I could to lie my way out of it, but at the end of the day, it was clear that something had to change. That summer, my parents told me that I would be spending a month hiking through the mountains of southwest Colorado on a program I had not yet heard of called Outward Bound. Outward Bound was meant to be an opportunity for me to reflect and think about the choices I wanted to make and the person I wanted to be. It was great for me to experience, but it was not a fix for everything I had to work on. Most lasting takeaway from my experience was that in order to change, you have to want to change. This realization came to me while I was alone for 3 days with minimal food. I thought I had just unlocked the only thing keeping me from being the person I knew I could be. In order to change, you have to want to change. See, now I was ready to take on anything. I really wanted to do things differently from somewhere deep inside of me. It was a new feeling that felt like change. I believed that simply desiring to change was enough. So I'm here, so I was wrong. After an Outward Bound, things got worse. I continued to make bad decisions. My grades started slipping, and I focused entirely on instant gratification. I'm even less proud of the way I handled my relationships, especially those I was closest to. I was largely unavailable emotionally and used substances to numb myself even further. I still had so much love and appreciation for my parents, but from an outside perspective, that was really hard to see. In applying to college, I ended up finishing the application for less than half of the schools I wanted to be considered admission to. I'd say that's an accurate representation of how I was doing at the time. Of those 5 schools that I applied to, I managed to send in my required materials to just 2 schools. After I graduated from high school, my dad told me he was not willing to support me in going to college in the fall, that I would have to find another plan for the upcoming year. Shortly after, I moved into an apartment with 2 of my friends. I saw the person I could slip into, being broke and relying on substances, and surrounded by people who only made me more of both of those things. It felt a lot more real than I thought it ever would. I knew I was better than this, and that I could turn myself around. I just needed a little help. I had a serious talk with my mom. I started looking at gap year programs, and I knew I couldn't really trust myself to focus on the important stuff in life without a little guidance. I wanted to change, yes, but that wasn't enough. I sent my dad the link to the program. He said he'd support me on one condition. If I got sent home for any reason at any time, I'd have to pay him back for all of the program. So I took a bet on myself. I jumped out of the plane, with no way to get back on, only one way down. It was the biggest trust fall of my life, and I'm so glad I jumped out. Okay, here we go.
You can do it.
So,
Be good, man.
So, one of the first things I struggled with was substances. TBB substance policy was a huge attraction for me when I signed up. I knew that staying sober was going to be necessary for me to break out of all the bad habits I was falling victim to. Thankfully, due to the busyness of the schedule and the breathtaking views along the way, my mind was focused on much more important things than substances. I was thrown into a sink or swim situation, and I knew if I really wanted to change, I'd have to power through and figure out how to stay afloat. I woke up to my host mom turning on the lights and saying, "¿Quieres desayunar?" Followed by hours of working in the fields, an hour and a half of walking to and from home base, a 2-hour seminar or a 2-hour Spanish lesson, lots of media project work, and many more things to fill up the busy days. New sights, smells, sounds, and tastes helped me so much in being able to stop hiding from my feelings, and I really let my mind become clear and focused on the cultural immersion of the trip. Before TVB, I compared myself to my peers. Living in the bubble of Ann Arbor, I compared myself to the privileged high school kids. I looked at extremely shallow and meaningless aspects of other people's lives, like how late their curfew was, or what kind of shoes they had, how many followers they had, and so on. I completely allowed myself to let these unhealthy comparisons have complete autonomy over my actions and habits. While it certainly is human nature to compare yourself to others, it's also in your control to choose who you're comparing yourself to and how much you want to allow yourself to be affected by that. I wasn't there yet, though. At this stage of my TVB journey, I was just glad I didn't draw any of these shallow comparisons anymore. I was entirely disconnected from home, and nobody in Tech Pond cares how much you bench press. Thankfully, none of the students on this year's GGY care about any of that stuff either. I felt a little out of place when talking about things like Michigan football. I quickly began comparing myself to these new people, but in the same ways as before, for different reasons, different things. For example, I began to frequently hear questions like, "Did you journal yet tonight? Did you do the seminar readings? What have you been talking to your host family about? How are you doing with your personal time and your self-care?" All things that none of my friends have ever asked me. So I started asking myself those same questions. My headspace sounded like this. Should I start journaling? Do I have a journal? I mean, I have a notebook, but does that count? Am I talking to my host family now? We talked for a while after dinner, but then they proposed that we descansar. And my roommates probably get annoyed when I try to lengthen the post-dinner combo. We wake up early tomorrow to work in the fields, and I don't want to make them angry. Are other people getting more out of this experience than me? If so, how much more? And how can I catch up? Is my motivation high enough? So, okay, great. Now at least I felt like I've given up on a lot of the substance issues, but I was still feeling behind, less than, or at least less qualified, and unhappy. My perception totally shifted during our masculinity seminar. We watched a film and later had a long discussion about our relationships with gender roles and the expectation of men in society, as well as toxic masculinity. A quote that I thought about almost every day for the rest of the trip was, "Comparison is the thief of all happiness." Naturally, when I first heard that, I thought about my own level of happiness and satisfaction in life. I realized just how self-critical I was and how removing that could allow me to live in a healthier headspace. I remember feeling extremely anxious whenever I thought about myself in comparison to others. After having parasite eggs and amoebas in my stomach for the second time, it was very irresponsible for me to go more than a few yards from the nearest toilet. Honestly. I ended up staying back from a cool-sounding kite festival and subconsciously repeated a critical narrative in my head. Every time I saw pictures of the festival, I felt bad about myself. I thought I was missing out on an opportunity that everyone else experienced. After the seminar in Guatemala, I began the process of giving myself grace and comparing myself to past versions of myself more instead of other people. I also started noticing others' actions and tried to understand them better before looking inward and placing judgment. My host fam in Guatemala really helped me see what was important. Because I was living with them, I was forced to take an in-depth look at how they chose to live their lives, what values their family places importance on, and I saw a family I can learn a lot from. The Cho family is considered pretty well off. They're a family of 7. They own a very large house and rent out 6 of their rooms. Their main source of income is the renting of tables, canopies, and chairs for events like weddings. With a small truck piled and strapped to the brim with chairs, and a small group of men our host father employed, the business was always in motion. Our 2 host brothers, Manuel and Josue, were consistently called upon to help their father, often late into the night. I thought about how inspiring this family was. From our host dad leaving the house all night to keep the community safe with a baseball bat, to the 14-year-old Natalie sitting in the kitchen all evening during her math homework while cooking for the hungry men her dad was contracting. It was easiest for me to relate to Manuel because he was 19. He worked all day on the weekends at a restaurant. He helped his dad constantly and spent hours studying in his room almost every night. On top of this, he was trying to be a good boyfriend, a role model for his younger siblings and his nephew. I asked my host mom if he had ever smoked or drank. She said she thanks God that he never has. One night, I saw him leaving the house pretty late. I asked where he was going, and he told me he was going out to see his girlfriend. I walked outside on the balcony and watched him get on his motorbike. He told me he worked for years in high school to afford it. He's got his last name stickered on the gas tank, as well as a couple of Jesus stickers. I saw him throw on his leather jacket and drive off into the night. The only thing running through my mind was, damn, this dude is badass. I truly look up to Manuel so much. This family made me look inward. I realized a lot of what I emphasized was unimportant and unhealthy, shattering the egoistic comparisons I was making. I learned to look forward instead of on either side of me and create my sense of self from myself instead of how I was doing compared to others. Manuel took his circumstances, didn't feel bad for himself for a second. He took what he was given, said this looks great, and ran with it. Okay. When I got to Thailand, I started comparing myself to others less. This was an extremely liberating feeling. Upon the exploration of my religion and spirituality in the country of Thailand, I began taking a closer look at Buddhism. Through what I was reading, it became evident that although I wasn't habitually comparing myself to others as much, I was still habitually reacting. This is something that I'm still challenged with today, daily. Reacting to any circumstance based on personal judgments and assumptions can alter our perception of reality as it's continually making meaning and creating stories about everything that happens. A thought arises, we create a story about it. The story evokes an emotion, we create another story about that. And on until before we know it, we're hardly paying attention to our lived reality at all. We're trapped in a habitual reactivity to our own thoughts. For example, I subconsciously assumed that as I tried to be a supportive listener to my roommate, I would be able to not take on an emotional burden. I was wrong. I found myself feeling frustrated and couldn't quite explain why. I later realized I had taken on other people's emotional baggage, especially when it triggered a sensitive spot in me. Buddhism continued to interest me, and needless to say, I had a lot of takeaways. 2 ideas stuck out to me from my media project on monks. First is the idea of non-self, and the second is to remind yourself that things are never inherently good or bad. I had the opportunity to interview several monks, people who have given up the ability to wear different clothing, to eat past noon, to have facial hair or regular hair, and much more. During one of my interviews, I asked a monk to help me understand the concept of non-self. He told me to point at myself, to show him what part of me made me me. I'm pretty sure I pointed at myself like this. He asked if my chest was me, or my ear, or my feet. He asked what part of me, when you strip it all down, was the true me. I did not have an answer for him. Then he explained further, saying my body comes from the earth. It was created by the matter on earth and will eventually rest there forever. He said that my body was made mostly of water, and that my lungs were always filled with wind. He said the fire inside me gave me the ability to sit in my chair in front of him and listen to him. I thought about this for a long time and struggled with what this meant for me in my day-to-day life. Practically, here's what he was getting at. Us humans are always making adjustments as we go. So there's no fixed, permanent version of ourselves, only the continually changing combinations of causes and conditions. Are you more you when you're hungry or when you've just eaten some pad thai? Is the authentic you the one that's well rested, or the one who's sleep deprived because you've been laboring over a POL the past week? The Buddhist teaching of non-self says that there's no permanent or fixed you. There's only a web of complex, inseparable, and permanent causes and effects. When I asked a different monk about the idea that things aren't inherently good or bad, he mentioned that as life unfolds, it is neither positive nor negative, and that things simply are as they are. This confused the hell out of me. What if I stub my toe, or get an unfortunate haircut in Ghana, or Ghana? What if I get a tapeworm, or what if I eat some fiambre? Are these things not inherently bad? I learned to take a deep breath. I learned not to ascribe meaning to certain things and become a watcher, to allow things to unfold in front of me over a longer period of time. I've taken this idea to heart and practiced it in everyday life. It is starting to make more sense. This teaching specifically has helped me break my nasty habit of habitually reacting, and allowed me to be more okay with uncertainty. All right, so here we go. As I was digging deep into the inner workings of myself, I felt some of the emotions that hadn't had the chance to be released in a healthy way. I remember the feeling of not being able to cry, for months. There was a time when I sat with myself for a while and tried to figure it all out. I felt the gateway to my emotions was shut. I envisioned myself slowly prying these gates open and trying to take a few big steps inside. When I got there, I was surrounded by many emotions. I could feel them, but I couldn't see them or identify them. More importantly, I couldn't let them wash over me in any way. I didn't realize just how emotionally constipated I was. I was left with the impression that I was no longer in need of a good cry. I had to free myself from that idea and wake up without thinking like that. Until one day, I found myself looking at Molly, who I had just made cry. I felt like I had just swallowed a grenade. I couldn't really tell you what happened, but safe to say, the next day I cried over 4 times, all day basically, and the floodgates had opened. So, yeah, that was huge. It's just crazy because I'm pretty much crying. They didn't really cry. We never have expected that at the beginning of this, but here I am. Okay, so cool. Moving on to Ghana, I was forced to realize something else: privilege. In a seminar we had on this topic, I was left feeling more educated on everything I've been gifted with. There was an underlying sense of guilt that I had squandered many opportunities that I was lucky to have it all. The intense culture shock I experienced after moving into my final homestay catalyzed a lot of internal growth. I realized that although a lot of my privilege pertains to money, I was privileged in ways I hadn't yet thought about. After weeks spent watching the females in our group getting harassed and becoming uncomfortable, I found myself faced with the question, what does it mean to be an ally? I realized I would never quite understand how it feels to be a woman. I felt a duty to protect the females in the group, but felt bad that they needed protection. At times, I felt ashamed to be a man, and extremely angry and frustrated towards other men. So there's a time when, I think it was right when we got to Cambodia, where I was really close to Molly, and I just kept having these painfully vivid, I don't know what the right word is, thoughts or images of her getting taken by another man, because we had been warned so much about human trafficking in Cambodia, and it literally only got worse when we went to Ghana. So I felt extremely angry and frustrated towards other men. One day, I was on my way to work placement with Francisco. We were looking out the window and we saw a man putting his hands on a woman aggressively and in a restraining way. He had a tight grip on her arm and she was crying, pleading for him to let go. Cisco and I both tensed. I remember him telling our driver to stop, and I unbuckled my seatbelt. I had so much anger pent up inside me that I was ready to just fight that dude. But as the car continued to slowly roll down the dirt road, we saw the entire situation more clearly. The man and woman were standing outside of a school at what looked like a town hall meeting. There was a large group of about 40 men and women sitting in rows of plastic chairs, watching this woman get assaulted and not doing anything about it. Not only did this make me think more about my role as a man in society, but my brain also went to structural violence. How can these oppressive systems exist? What is this doing to the economy, the health of a nation? Although poverty in countries like Ghana can cause diseases, disease also causes poverty. Social, economic, and political factors contribute to why the poor stay poor. By seeing a painful glimpse into some of the social structures, it was moments like this that caused me to look introspectively the most. How can I use my privilege to empower? Moving forward, I'm going to use my awareness to create change. To volunteer, to donate, to vote, and to be careful who I'm supporting. TBB has shown me some of the far-off corners of the world, along with some of the most life-changing people I know. To be honest, I'm not sure all of the ways this trip has changed me. I might never know. But I do know that I'm so glad that I jumped out of the plane and into the open air that was TBB, and I'll be eternally grateful for my experience. Thank you. I thought POLs were stupid. And cute. So careful. Not sure.
Possibly change.
Yeah.
So you form this bond with a group that knows the new you, maybe the you that was always there. Are you concerned or worried or wondering what's going to happen when you go home and off to college, like what that old group, the old you knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some relationships that I at first was like, okay, I realize now I need to, change them. I need to reassess and I need to confront these people and tell them that I'm not gonna do some of the same stuff I was doing. And that frightened me. And then later, now I'm excited to do it, and it will be a cleansing opportunity. But for a while, yeah, I was just kind of scared to do it, but it needs to happen. And yeah, I'm definitely nervous for that, especially because, a lot of this trip is still in motion, even though this is the last day. But it's like, I don't even know who I'm going to be in a couple months, so yeah.
I have to say, you were always the nameless boy. Like, who is that boy?
Not for me.
You have an inside scoop, but you didn't have Facebook, and your struggle was comparing yourselves to other people. Did you ever have one?
So I did never have Facebook. I'm
Or
convinced
Instagram.
it's for older people.
Right.
But
No offense taken.
yeah. Anyway, so Instagram is awful. I have that. I have Twitter. Snapchat's gross too. So I think it was less about social media for me and more about like people that I knew.
Yeah.
Like in comparing to like my closest friends who are supposed to be. I mean, just it's part of like what I talked about with toxic masculinity. Like people are just comparing, even if we're like supposed to be support systems for each other. It's just that competitive nature that I think got me away from thinking how I was thinking and into like competitive journaling. No, I would lose. But stuff like that, it was more personal than it was on social media, but I don't like social media either.
So my other question is, being in the minority with all of these strong women, how did that affect your view of this trip?
Yeah, good cue. So first of all, I'd like to say that like in their speeches, they talked about all of these powerful women that they've met and that affected them. But I'm looking at 4 pretty incredible. So, I mean, yeah, it was tough. I don't know. There was 5 guys and then 4 and then 3, and we got along, but they were nothing like my friends at home.
Right.
And yeah, I think it was great for me to develop relationships like this. Really good. Yeah.
Has this trip kind of changed your motivations for like going to school and like what you want to do like in the future?
Yeah, but I'm not entirely sure yet. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think it would be cool to look at the integrity of some of like big corporations and companies and where is this money going? Are they, contributing to like how much waste is in the world? Stuff like that. Ethics and like that. I mean, I'm looking to go into business school, so that hasn't changed, but I'm sure it won't be the same. Yeah.
I'd like to go back for a sec to an earlier question about dealing with going back to an environment where people knew you before this experience. Obviously, that's going to be challenging, and even though it sounds as though, based on how you've come out, I mean, it's clear. I think everyone would agree. I mean, the trajectory that you're on is a pretty awesome one. But I guess the question is, there are going to be some. It's not going to be straight line up.
Oh, yeah.
What's the plan in terms of support? What are you going to be able to tap into? What do you plan to? How do you plan to? When you feel that kind of stretching back into triggers, how are you set up to deal with that?
It's a good question. Thankfully, my family back here has always wanted to see me make this change. I didn't allow anyone of them. That's great. This fellow students, the leaders especially, I'll definitely have to spend some time on the phone. And there are friends that, you know, I've reflected on, and there are some ones that are cool to let slip, but I mean, I don't know. Like, we're not the most, like, toxic masculinity type group of guys. I do think I know of, you know, especially my closest friend Liam, that, like, he talking to a couple of these people that I think have real integrity will be something, and I'm obviously gonna have to keep my guard up, you know, and make sure that, you know, they got my back. But I think they do. Some of them no. But some of them, yeah. And if I just explain exactly what is going on and what I need from them, I don't doubt that they'll, you know, be able to do
You've
that.
done a lot of learning during this trip, obviously. This will be an opportunity to do a little teaching, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that is very true. Yep.
This is just a comment, not a question, but you know, just the raw honesty that I've heard from you and from everybody that's spoken to me. It's just, to me, it's just awe-inspiring, and I just can't tell you how many adults that I know, you know, I've been around for a very long time, that have never reached that level of honesty with themselves. You guys, I mean, should be just so proud of that, really,
So
all of you.